This abomination is the worst tabletop sports sim of all time. I'm not kidding. There's no game out there as complex or as confusing as the APBA basketball board game. There's also no game as boring and tedious as this game. And I can't believe I'm looking at this game again. Oh yeah, here we go, APBA basketball. So the story that I have behind this is my dad bought this game back in the mid-70s. He grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and he was a big basketball fan. This was his second APBA game after getting the APBA football game. Anyway, he gave APBA basketball a valiant try. I think he actually played quite a few games, but of course he had to put it aside after a while, largely because the game is unplayable. Anyway, when I was a kid, I tried the game because it was in his closet, and I hated it right away. And now it's your turn to learn firsthand about just how bad this game is. Now this copy I've got is special. It even comes with the original shipping box. This is an unused and unpunched first edition of the game. The original owner didn't play it at all, not even once. And I'm not going to spoil its perfection. So normally I would call this a collector's item. I mean, it hasn't been sold for well over 30 years now, right? But seriously, no collector in his right mind would ever want to buy or collect this piece of junk. And the best way for me to break this all down and explain this to you is to just simply show you how poorly conceived this game really is. Okay, we'll start this off by taking a look in the manual. The first thing you do is you pick your starting 5 player cards for each team and you write the players on the score sheet. The rules tell you really strictly that you're supposed to have 2 forwards, a center, and 2 guards on the court listed in that order. Now that's a strange thing to say, right? Because I've been through this rule book, I've played this game before, I can't see any reason for you to have these players in any order. From what I can tell, there doesn't seem to be any place where the listing and the order comes into play, or where the positions of the players come into play, or anything, right? There's actually not like a man-on-man defensive system in this game. You'll see in a second. Of course, in the real sport of basketball, you start the game off with a jump ball. Even in really crappy video games like Ultimate Basketball, you start off with a jump ball. In APBA basketball, you get to fill out columns and do math. Yeah. So before you start the game, you copy down the offensive and defensive ratings from the player cards of your starting players down onto the score sheet. You have to calculate multiple ratings for every single player on both teams before you can even start the game, like before you can have the jump ball. And it is worse than it sounds. Okay, so here's a scan of a Julius Erving card from the mid-1970s, and no, I'm not the one who made this scan. So the Doctor has an offensive rating of 5 and a defensive rating of 5. He's got a rebound rating of 13 and a foul rating of 12. His assist rating is 21, and he's got this scores rating of 25. Anyway, you're supposed to put all of those fields into this part of the score sheet. And the thing is that you don't just like write down these numbers, right? Which would be bad enough. No, you have to write down the numbers and then you have to calculate indexes. The offensive and defensive ratings are easy. You just get your total from those. But there's this complex procedure with the other ratings where you order the players from the smallest number to the largest and you create a range. When you're done, the ranges wind up looking something like this ugly thing. It's like creating a spreadsheet by hand. And the worst part, the thing that just kills this game, is that you have to redo those calculations every single time there's a substitution. I mean, how many substitutions are there in an NBA game, right? If you're in the first quarter and you're like, I don't know, 3 minutes into the game and some guy gets 2 fouls, you want to take him out, right? Well, if you're playing APBA basketball, you don't, because then you have to recalculate all your indexes, right? This problem right here is the chief reason why this game was a commercial failure, despite the fact that APBA sold it stubbornly for over 30 years. There were thousands of people who bought this game at one point in time, who tried it once, maybe played half of a game, gave up on it, and never touched it ever again. It was that bad. Now, the reason why APBA used this method has a lot to do with the old APBA baseball game, and I'll explain this to those of you who are not familiar. APBA's baseball game includes a rudimentary fielding system that consists of play result numbers divided into 3 different columns. You figure out which column the team would be in by adding together each player's fielding numbers and comparing it with this chart. APBA used a similar system in its football game where you compare one team's offensive point total to the other team's defensive point total. That gives you the column for your play result numbers. Now the basketball game has a similar system. This is the column index, which has 7 possible numbers. Yeah, there are 7 different ranges in this game, right? So there are 3 different, indexes in the baseball game and 3 in the football game. But now for basketball, there are 7. Like, why? And why are we doing so much work to organize these teams into different columns in the first place, right? It only gets worse from here. When you roll the dice and get a result from a player card, you find the result in a column like this. Notice that the lines are different depending on what column number your offense is in. Anyway, you find the number, you go to the right to find the result that matches the location letter on the court, the type of shot, and whether you're guarded or not. The whole system is so complex that they included this straight edge plastic piece to help you find the result. I'm not joking. So the hardest part about making this video was figuring out where to begin. The next hardest part is to figure out how to make sense out of this behemoth that isn't really well connected and doesn't make any sense as it is. This game is so complex and the manual is just so poorly written that it's really hard for me to figure out what's happening. Anyway, to reiterate, you start off with the column rating, which you get by comparing your offensive total to the defensive total, right? Now you've got to know where your player is on the court, and that's another hassle. APBA basketball includes this kind of fancy looking court with all sorts of different sections. Player cards have these tabs on top. Sir Charles and Dr. J haven't had theirs taken off, probably because the original owner gave up on this game before playing it. Anyway, in theory, you're supposed to take the top off and put it on the right square of the court, and you'd better not lose Rick Barry's top. The defense then sticks players out to defend you, I think. Yeah, I think that's what happens. I don't know. So the creator of this game, J. Richard Seitz, he kind of forgot to talk about defense in the 20-page manual, right? So there's nothing in here about this guy guards that guy or anything like that. Defense just happens as a group thing. So the individual defensive skill doesn't make any difference in this game at all. You can actually play this game entirely on paper if you want, as long as you remember where those locator boxes are, right? So you could just have 5 cards spread out in front of you and just sort of goldfish it, as they say in Magic the Gathering, right? Now the boxes though and the locations are important because of how the game actually flows. For example, let's say you've got the ball on box D. Dr. J has the ball. You want to pass it to somebody down in box B, right down here. Assuming you're playing it with somebody else, you choose the play card for box D and you place it face down. Your opponent then chooses a defensive play card and puts that face down as well. It's kind of like a guessing game. And that's why I said that there's basically no defensive system. I mean, you can go take a look again at the charts. You'll see that there's no room and no place for defense to operate, right? There is a system in terms of the indexes, but I mean, this just isn't realistic at all, right? So you don't have any strategy. You don't take your best defender and put him on the best shooter and create maybe a mismatch somewhere else. That's what happens with Stratomatic. That's what happens in Hoops. That's what happens in Mickey's Fast Break. It happens actually in almost every basketball board game. Replay is the one exception, right? But instead, in this game, all that is really got is this weird guessing system. Anyway, you roll the dice for Dr. J, and let's say you rolled a red 1 and a white 5 for 15. We're passing, so you go under the P column and find number 4. Now you go to this big and ugly passing and dribbling board. There are 3 of these. You want the one that says from D on top. First, you got to find the dice roll column index, so you go up here. So let's say we're in index 4. Now we go down to where the 4 shows up, which is right here. We're going to B, so we go over to B. So if the defense guesses right, you do G for guarded, and if they guess wrong, you do O for open. Let's say that they guessed wrong, so we look under O for open. We get this, 3T. Okay, so 3 is the passing number and T is the dribbling letter, right? So you can pass or you can dribble and the results all go together, and you have to remember that one's for passing, one's for dribbling. What? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So T basically means that you dribbled over to that place. It was successful. I don't know why he called it T. I guess he ran out of letters, right? You use the exact same procedure both for dribbling and passing, even though there are different columns on the player card. And anyway, that passing number 3, that is the passing accumulation rating, which helps you make shots after you pass the ball. So if you go look at that board again, you'll notice this passing accumulation thing on the bottom. If you get this to 10, you make the shot automatically. Passing once gets you a certain number from the boards, say 3 like we just saw. You could pass again, maybe you get a 2 or something, I don't know. And then when you take the shot, you use this field goal board. If the shot came off a pass, you use the pass columns, which gives you another number. And if that number hits 10, the shot is good. Now, if you had like a good set shooter, like you could just take a set shot with that set shooter as soon as he has the ball. Anyway, think about this for a minute, right? So on offense, if you've passed once, you basically have to pass until you hit 10 or like close enough to 10 to have that chance to make the shot, right? Now, this kind of makes sense in terms of being like a strategic game. So your opponent is trying to guess which section of the floor you're going to pass it to, and you're trying to like pass it somewhere else or like fake them out or whatever, right? I can understand that like to an extent. The problem, of course, is that has nothing to do with how basketball is coached or played, but whatever. But like, do you think this game could be any more freaking complicated than this? Oh, and heaven forbid you miss a shot. So if you miss a shot, there's a possible rebound, and the board says M followed by the section of the board. Now you've got to take a look at these finder columns you were supposed to write up before the game started. First, to figure out how the rebound indexes compare among the two teams, like to figure out which team got the rebound, you take the difference between the two rebound totals of the two teams and add 18 to it. So the first team gets everything from 1 to that number 18, 19, 20, whatever. The second team is everything from the next number up to 36. So when there's a rebound, you roll first to see which team got it. You roll the dice one time and you compare it to this range number here on the left. Then to figure out which player gets the rebound, you use the total rebound number here to find the correct column first. Then you roll the dice and you look at the number it gives you. You then compare that number to the range you filled out at the beginning of the game to finally figure out which player got the rebound. And anyway, the foul system, I'm not even going to go into that, right? The foul system basically works the same way with all these stupid locator indexes and all this garbage. Anyway, this is without a doubt the most confusing and worst designed rebounding system I have ever seen in any basketball game. Like, doesn't matter who made it, this is the worst. I'm having a hard time even considering how you could come up with a system that's more complex than having multiple indexes that talk about rebounding. See, the thing is, like most of APBA's other games, up to this day, APBA basketball is really an old school style game, right? It's an old school game that uses a whole bunch of charts and a whole bunch of numbers, and you find the number and you look up the number on the chart. Like, some people like it, right? It's got a certain sort of feel to it. If you play like the baseball game, it'll have a good rhythm to it. It can be played quickly. The basketball game cannot, right? It just kills the flow of basketball, and it makes it so that these games last absolutely forever. A full quarter consists of 96 dice rolls, but they don't count the dozens of finder rolls you'll also have to do each quarter. And some events only take up half a dice roll in the timing system. And like I said before, the absolute worst part is that you got to figure out all those indexes again once somebody is substituted out. In fact, back in the old days, the fan magazine, the APBA Journal, would print tips for how to like actually play this game. And what they said is, oh, all you have to do is get a bunch of index cards and calculate all the possible indexes that your team has ahead of time. So when you're playing and you have these 5 guys out on the court, now you know right away what the index rating is. So, which is brilliant, right? All you have to do is spend like, an hour per team doing all the math. I mean, who wants to do that? Now, if you spend time actually watching basketball and not playing crappy games like this, you'll have an appreciation for the flow of the game, the way that the best players can kind of flow through and simply dominate. The sport is all about matchups and different styles, for example, Larry Bird shooting in transition. Individual talent and individual effort really makes a difference in the real game, especially on defense. Of course, player positioning can also make a big difference, especially when it comes to stopping the fast break. Team defense is also important, as well as teamwork on offense, and at least APBA was trying to emulate some of this. So, I'll be honest with you guys, and I hope that I don't offend any of you here, but the more basketball I watch and the more I pay attention to this sport, the more that I realize that this sport really cannot be reduced to a tabletop board game. It just can't, right? There's such a high level of abstraction that is required that is just not going to happen, right? Even the best games turn basketball into something that is unrecognizable. Tabletop games like Hoops, which I think is the best on the market, take results from both the offensive and defensive players so you can see an actual matchup. But you can't see where you are on the court, and there's no real positioning. It's basically just a bunch of one-on-one matchups. Honestly, APBA's strength was the fact that it had this complex location system, but that meant that it had to use these enormous boards, which honestly are totally insane. And the indexing system is just beyond bad. Anyway, there's actually more to be said about this, including the really bizarre assist system where the guy who gave you the most passing points gets the assist. Whatever. But I'll just leave that there. APBA's basketball game, it turns out, was a huge financial drain on the company. It really was. Seitz was sold on his system, and he stuck with it for years and years, despite the obvious fact that nobody was buying it, and the people who had bought it hated it. In fact, the thing is that APBA did not discontinue this game until Seitz passed away in late 1992. The funny part is that they discontinued the game within a couple of weeks. In 1993, the APBA Game Company announced that the old game would be discontinued, and it sold off its entire backstock of games and seasons for dirt cheap, $5 per season. By the way, take a look at this list of seasons. Look at how far back they go. These are all original printings. None of these were reprinted. Anyway, I happen to own a copy of the new version, the revised version of the game, which simplified the player cards a bit. The problem, though, is that this game uses the same outdated chart and index system that the first game used. In fact, the master version of the revised game is basically the same as the old game, including those stupid index zones. The only improvement is that they give you the indexes on this master sheet, but if the rebound locator roll is a number outside the index of the guys on the court, you have to roll the dice again. Now, the part that really boggles my mind is something I found out very recently. I'm not going to show you the letter and stuff, but I'm under the understanding that Jim Mickey offered to help APBA redesign its basketball game. This is the same Jim Mickey that had created Mickey's Fast Break, right? That's the most legendary of the basketball board games. It still is kind of abstract, but it's a lot better than APBA. Now, Mickey understood how board games actually flow. He also understood the sort of things that make basketball fans happy. Stuff like players having different ratings depending upon which position they're playing defensively, right? But instead of going with Jim Mickey's ideas and with letting him help out, the people who succeeded Seitz at APBA decided to do a half-hearted simplification of the old board game, and they wound up with a product that literally did not sell at all. Now, this revised game, I have a copy. It's really, really hard to find. You don't see it come up on eBay very often. And it's kind of funny because if you really look at the component quality, it's actually the worst product I've ever seen come from APBA. It looks like they used a typewriter to sort of type the board together, and the spacing is way off, and the manual is all over the place. It sucks, man. It really sucks. Anyway, the legacy of APBA basketball kind of lives on, maybe. For example, the recently released 4th Street basketball board game has a similar system of dividing the court into zones. As complex as these symbols look, though, it's still a much simpler and easier to understand game than the bewildering and horribly designed APBA basketball. So APBA basketball really is the joke of the tabletop sim community, more so than any other tabletop sim, except of course for the very few defenders of this game that are out there, and they are quite vocal. My understanding from the majority of people who played this game is that it did not produce realistic results, unless of course you use the optional simplification rules that would take away all of the strategy and all of the interesting stuff in the game. So basically, you prepare indexes for shooting and assists before you start the game. Instead of moving your players and passing the ball around manually, you roll the dice to find the player who takes the shot, and then you roll the dice again for the shot. And of course, if you're playing the game like this, you don't really even need to worry so much about using the court. You just sort of use the system to tell you which box you're in, and that's about it. So that simplified version does give you more realistic results, but you have to understand how the cards were created, right? So the scoring index in these cards basically is how frequently the player shot, right? That tells you the number of attempts, and the results that you would get from that index would tell you basically their shooting percentage. So yeah, if you strip the game down to just find the guy who has the ball and have him shoot the ball, you will likely get realistic shooting percentages, right? But by that point, what you're doing is you're using an overly complex box score generator. There's no actual game here. There's no actual strategy. There's nothing to do, right? But if you're in charge of that offensive movement and all that passing, so in other words, if you're playing it like the fun way, all the realism goes out the window. There's nothing that will prevent you from giving the ball to like Michael Jordan every single time or Wilt Chamberlain every single time. Anyway, if you look around, you can find evidence of some people who actually played this game, to an extent at least. But the thing is, if you look closely, you'll realize that most of these score sheets are incomplete. For example, this one ended in the third quarter. Now, my guess is that the majority of people who have actually played a full game likely used the simplified rules, unless they somehow had like 8 hours of time to keep moving those like tops around on the court and all that stuff. Even then, even if you're using the simplified rules, a full game takes you between 2 and 3 hours because of all of the dice rolling and all of the index calculating. The whole game feels like a math test, except that it's a math test that was administered by a moron. Copies of this game too tend to be pretty expensive on the secondary market, but if you buy them, you need to remember that it was not that long ago that these seasons were selling for like $5 each. You will also find that it is a lot easier to find brand new and completely unused copies of this game, including the very first edition, which I own, than copies that were actually used. That is how bad this game is. My recommendation for you is to stay far away from this game. You do not want it. You don't want to try it. You don't want to try to fix it. It's broken. Just leave it alone.